All right, well, welcome all of you who have either dialed in or joined us here live in San Francisco. My name is Tyler Haugen from the People team. I'm extraordinarily excited to be here today with you guys to really start to talk about how we work across different personality types. So many of us know that the great part about Mozilla is we really have this focus on diversity, and more importantly, we have a focus on inclusion. And sometimes those things can feel a little bit challenging to figure out, how do I work with introverts? How do I work with extroverts? And what's that mix feel like? So today we're really going to talk about how that comes together. We've brought in an amazing speaker that I'm going to have Matt Frasca introduce in just a moment. But we really want you guys to take this in, think about ways you can apply this to your own work, and be really mindful about how we as Mozilla come together to be the most productive, the most innovative, and the most open that we can be. So with that, I'm going to bring up Matt Frasca, one of my HR business partners, who's going to introduce us and get us kicked off with our amazing speaker today. So Matt, come on up and we'll go from there.
Good morning, everybody. I get the honor of introducing Jennifer to you all. I wanted to also share, my name is Matt Frasca. I'm a business partner here. As Tyler said, I support Firefox, Open Innovation, and the People team. I'm also one of only 2 in-house certified Insights facilitators. So for those who have been through Insights or are curious about it, you can certainly reach out to me. You can also reach out to Josh Cruz, who is our other certified facilitator. So I get to introduce Jennifer Selby Long. She is truly an expert in the ethical use of Myers-Briggs. If you have not heard of Myers-Briggs, I'm surprised, especially in this space. She advises on the impact of personality and gender on financial behavior. Well known and respected throughout Silicon Valley, having worked with over 3,000 professionals and leaders throughout the Valley, including clients such as Airbnb, LinkedIn, Cisco, Sienna, and of course Mozilla. So with that, I'm going to introduce Jennifer to kick off, and welcome, Jennifer.
Thank you. Good morning. It's really a pleasure to be back at Mozilla, and I really want to thank you for having me back and for the opportunity to speak on one of my favorite topics around introversion and extroversion. So really the first question we have to answer is why bother, right? It takes work, it takes effort. And I think for me, the answer to why bother to understand different personalities is that without this knowledge, it's like trying to tread water while holding a brick. And I'm going to suggest, man, that brick doesn't just include the lack of understanding of the other personalities of the people on your team, but also the weight of feeling like, oh, it's a lot of work, and why can't they be more like me, or what we call BLM syndrome, or BLU, be more like us syndrome. And so it's just a lot harder than it has to be. But if you let go of the brick, if you actually are able to understand differing personalities, it just gets easier because we understand the different lenses that all of those great, cool people we're working with see situations and problems and challenges through. So I've been asked to give a little short history of the world of personality tests, and particularly some of the myths around them. So let's start there. This quote from the Talmud: "We do not see things as they are. We see them as we are." Who knows what the Talmud is? Anybody? Hey, we got some answers. I call it one of the world's oldest self-help books, written by the greatest rabbis for their people, put in writing about 2,000 years ago. The advice and the guidelines for living and working together probably predate that by 1,000 years or more. So we see that for just about as long as people have been writing things down, we've faced this challenge of how we all see things through our own lenses. So the earliest document looking sort of like a proficiency or personality test actually was in 2200 BCE, when the Chinese government began testing prospective and current government employees for proficiency, aptitude, looking at where they might be the best fit for their jobs, interestingly. You know, fast forward to about 460 BCE, we have Hippocrates and a number of other Greek physicians. And who knows who Hippocrates was? inventor of the oath that every doctor takes today when they get their medical license. So they came up with a theory that there were basically 4 large categories of people who had things in common. And they thought that, in fact, those were related to different chemical compositions in the body, if you will. Now, that second part has been proven by modern science to not be accurate, but the notion of the 4 temperaments actually scientifically is holding up quite well. And so they were onto something, even though they had no way to prove it. Let's fast forward past the Middle Ages. Let's fast forward past a whole lot of years to the next big interest in personalities and personality testing, which was really the early to mid 20th century. It just exploded, and it was a mix of personality tests and aptitude tests. By 1931, there were over 4,000 aptitude and personality tests in print. And it includes some things that we still know about today. The much hated, dreaded, and feared SAT was invented in this era. The Rorschach Test, right? Tell me, what do you see in this blob? A lot of tests that are still famous were developed during this era, and the earliest stages of the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator was also developed during this time, and it was based on Jung's model. There were a number of real giants in psychology at the time. Jung was one of them, and he popularized, among other things, the use of the terms introversion and extroversion, and we'll talk in a minute about what he meant by those in particular, because it is relevant. Now, one of the downsides or challenges that I think we still face today in the long tail of this explosion of personality tests is that a good chunk of these were designed to try to figure out what was wrong. It was psychologists and psychiatrists trying to come up with tools that would help them understand why somebody was suffering. Jung was actually not developing his theory so much around that as around what just simply makes people different, what makes them similar. Are there patterns that some people have in common? So it was a very different orientation toward the work. If we fast forward to today, Carl Jung's model has actually become the most widely applied, unknowingly by most people, the most popular model for understanding people and what makes us different or similar. And that's thanks primarily to the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator tool that's now been taken by so very many people over the years. So some popular tools today that are based on Jung that are valid: insights. About half of Mozillians have taken insights, correct? That's awesome. Developed by Andy Lothian. I can't remember exactly when Andy finished his test. This one has grown in popularity over the years. He started with Jung's theory of archetypes, actually, and then layered in the theory of personality as he built that one. MBTI, or Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, definitely the Big Mac daddy of them all. 30 million people have taken it and counting, and that's only the actual real MBTI. If we want to throw in all the fake free MBTIs that are out there, I don't even know how big the number is, but it's big. And then most recently, Type Coach, a toolkit that starts with a tool and then has lots of pop-up menus for you to use immediately as you roll. So some popular, valid Jung-based tools. Also, folks asked me to talk about fake tools and how do you know a tool is fake. So there are certainly some questionable alternatives out there. So let's look at some of the hits. This one's been floating around. There are 4 personality types. Take the quiz below to find out which one you fit into. One of the ways we know it's not based on science is it starts with the phrase, "let's play." All right, that's usually an invitation to a game, something that's fun, not necessarily something that's valid. We also know, in part because this test is free, it costs a fair bit of money to develop and validate a psychological test. And so the freebies are generally hints they're probably not valid. Some may be, some aren't. What we know is they haven't been tested, and so it's very hard to say. Second one, I love this one. What do you notice in this that might be a hint that it's not a valid test? It's for fun, but not to be taken real seriously. Anybody see any clues? This little emoji in the corner. Generally, if there's an emoji anywhere on the test, it's just for fun. It's meant to be just for fun, right? And the little bonus tip I'll throw into this is any site that forces you to either submit your email in order to see your own results or promote the test on Facebook or other social media in order to see your results it's a marketing tool. And yay, raw marketing tools, right? They're great, but they're not valid tests. So take these, enjoy them if you'd like, but just remember to take the results with a grain of salt. By way of example, I know that I don't prefer introversion, and we actually, Jenny and I, my associate, went through a whole slew of these to pick some, and I came out as 100% introvert because I answered the trivia questions right. So, these are signs that they're just for fun and not valid tests. So let's deep dive into a subset of personality that's our real focus today, which is on introversion and extroversion. What are they, and why the heck is extroversion spelled that way? These are probably the two questions I get the most. So let's answer the second one first, which is there are two ways to spell extroversion. One is more aligned with trait theory, the other is more aligned with type theory. And so today we're using type theory, Carl Jung's theory, and so we're spelling it with an A. You can spell it either way and you're fine, you're legit. But if you want to be real precise about it, Carl Jung's theory and other type-based theories use the A. So let's move on to what introversion and extroversion are. So what is Jung's theory about introversion and extroversion? It's not trait, which is to say it's not degree, which is to say, Jung said we all have an extroverted side and an introverted side. We have them, we are whole, we are complete, right? Everybody has them in equal measure. But we prefer one over the other, which is to say we lean on one more than the other. We go there first. It is our, if you will, preference. It's a lot like being left-handed or right-handed, right? I'm right-handed. The fact that I'm right-handed doesn't mean that my left arm is half as long just because I use it half as often, right? It's like handedness. You have both. But the theory is that you prefer one, it's more dominant in your psyche, but the other one is wholly and fully there. Where we see the variance is more in behavior. So if we look at this as just a preference for where you get your energy, where you prefer to direct your energy, there are really two primary directions. One is toward the inner world, thoughts, ideas, feelings, processing internally. Jung called this introversion. Today, it's sort of become popular for people to just simply say, I'm an introvert. But if we're going to be really proper about it in this model, it's I prefer introversion, because if we're going to be theoretically pure about it, we are all both introverts and extroverts because we have both. But I've loosened up over these last couple of years, and I'm not so hung up about it anymore. You will hear me generally say, prefer introversion, prefer extroversion. And of course, the other direction would be toward the outer world, the direction of energy outward. People, ideas that are being said, objects in the outer world called extroversion, or as some people would say, I'm an extrovert. The colors here correspond to the colors in Insights, as so many of you have taken it. So your blues and greens are the introverted preference types, and then your yellows and your reds are the extroverted preference types. So what does this mean, and how does this really play out when you're going through your day and you're on your teams? Well, interaction for people who prefer introversion goes kind of like this. Imagine that you prefer introversion. You wake up in the morning, you had a good night's sleep, you got lots of energy, and that energy is represented by coins in your pockets. Let's say each coin represents 1 unit of energy, and your pockets are full, they're heavy. You're walking out of your home, weighted down, you got lots of energy going on. So you walk down the street, you get on public transport or in your car, you get to work, you go to work, you interact with people throughout your day, or if you work at home, maybe you exit at lunchtime, get a little walk in. Now, what happens if you prefer introversion each time that you have an interaction? What happens to those coins? Do you put more in your pocket, or are you actually giving up? Are you actually giving up? Okay. I saw somebody mouth the words, giving up. Yeah, yeah, exactly. The preference for processing. Ruh-roh. We good? Okay. So that was a very extroverted microphone. It was expressing itself and its love for introverts. It's all good. So for those who prefer introversion, each interaction then it's a really important choice because you're giving up the coins, baby. You're giving up the energy. So that's really, really a big deal choice. Now, what about for those who prefer extroversion? Let's say those who prefer extroversion wake up, great night's sleep, just as much energy, just as many coins in the pocket. Walk down the street, go to work, go to the home office, interact with people throughout the day. Are you giving up a coin each time? Here's a unit of my energy. Okay, you get 1 unit. Or is it more like an interest-bearing account? More and more and more, right? And so for the extrovert, if you will, the energy rises throughout the day. And I often tell people, don't think your preference is for introversion just because you like to be alone at the end of the day. The distinction is often that for those who prefer introversion, if you've had a lot of interaction with others throughout the day, it's time to recharge, to be alone. The energy, the coins have been given away, you gotta get some more coins in your pockets. For those who prefer extroversion, there's so many coins in the pockets, we're kind of jangly. There's just like a little excess and you gotta get rid of it, right? Go to the gym and stare at the elliptical while you move or whatever it is to get rid of that excess energy. There's even now brain scan technology. Now, note, Jung was born in the 1800s and he died in the mid 20th century. So he did not have access to technology to scan brains, but there are even brain scans now, studies that show that for the people who prefer introversion, both thinking and editing go on internally, and then the talking happens. But for those who prefer extroversion, the thinking, the editing, and the talking all happen at the same time and in the same way, right? So as one of my late great colleagues in the field, Otto Krager, used to say, think to talk to think. Two very different ways of thinking. So right now, let's get some myths and misconceptions out of the way about introversion and extroversion. These float around, right? They're often culturally relevant, right, and driven by culture. Here's our stereotype of introversion, right? Yeah, if you prefer introversion, you must be externally cold and always analytical and probably reclusive and would rather not be with people if you could avoid them altogether, right? Sort of our extreme introversion example, and completely a misconception. My gosh, I have introverted clients who are the life of the party. They lead their organizations, they charge in the morning, they're there for everybody. They're up, they're often mistaken for extroverts, and then they go home and close the door. And how do I know, the best way to reach those clients real time? I text them between 5 and 6 in the evening their time, right? Because I know they're going to be alone. And they've all said, oh, I'm cool with text, just don't call me then. Just give me, I don't want to hear any voices for an hour. Give me a break. That's all I need. That's all I need. So, right, that doesn't quite fit the stereotype of Spock, right? And our introvert stereotype. Likewise, the extrovert, right? The stereotype of the extrovert is, larger than life, always shouting, right? Big, an ongoing myth and misconception aligns leadership and extroversion. The two are not correlated. They're not positively or negatively correlated, which is to say there's no relationship between your leadership potential and your preference for introversion or extroversion, none. But this is, The Rock, Dwayne The Rock is kind of our stereotype of the extrovert. But your behavior doesn't have to be on either extreme end of the spectrum to have a preference. Okay, Diane, it's time for an audience poll. Based on what you've learned so far,
All right. So we encourage folks, if you would like to participate in this poll online, you can do this in the room too. Just go online. On IRC, we're in Air Mozilla. And in Slack, we're at speaker-series. So please get in those rooms. And the first question that we will type in there as well is, most Mozillians prefer introversion, extroversion, or it's pretty even. Okay, fill it in, fill it in. We'll wait a few, like a minute, maybe 30 seconds. La, la, la. Actually, you know what? I can tell. All right, Mark, we're about ready to go to the results. So why don't we just go for it, Mark? And if you didn't get a chance to fill in this poll, there's going to be a few more. So please go to Air Mozilla and speaker-series. Here are the results of the poll.
Okay. Without my glasses.
There will be another poll, so stay in Air Mozilla, stay in speaker-series. You can definitely participate in the next one.
Great. Okay, great guesses. Make a note of that.
3 more came through saying introversion.
Okay. Oh, wow. It's a close race now. Did extroversion get any votes? No. No. Okay. It got 2? Sorry, I'm nearsighted, so. Ah, okay.
Folks are refreshing in real time.
Whoa. Cool. Okay, it's a 3-horse race now. Okay, and then just for fun, let's go to the next poll question. When you're ready.
Right. The next poll question, now that you're in the proper rooms, the question is do you see yourself as preferring introversion or extroversion? I'm typing in the poll link right now. So please fill out the poll link in IRC and in speaker-series.
Sorry. My finger accidentally hit that.
We've got about 25 people that filled it out. Should we
Cool.
show it? So
Yeah.
Mark, can we show the second
Neat.
results link, please?
Wow. Fascinating. I believe it shows, sorry, again, I'm terribly nearsighted. Introversion was the majority in attendance, and extroversion, and not sure, looked to be pretty tied. Okay, cool. For anyone who's not sure, Matt or I could help you clarify that. Yeah, if you'd like to, just give him a heads up. I'm happy to help. So here's the actual data for introversion and extroversion at Mozilla. About 59% prefer introversion and about 41% prefer extroversion. This interestingly tracks very closely to the demographics for software developers, right? For software engineers, within 2 points. For software engineers as a profession, about 57% introversion. So any implications that come to mind for you in terms of culture or style of the organization or on your work teams? You don't have to share it. You can just think about it. Okay. Anybody curious about how that compares to just the general population at large? General population at large is very close to 50-50. about 49% introversion, and about 51% extroversion. So the distribution, much like many other technical companies, skews more toward introversion here. We're going to look a little bit at some tips for how to adapt to introversion and extroversion as we go further on. Okay, time for a fun math quiz. How many of each preference do you think there are globally? Let's see, if we use our percentages, 3.675 billion prefer introversion. We know this because they told us by text. 3.825 billion prefer extroversion. We know this because they told us everywhere. Water cooler, meetings, parties, events. So, okay, enough with the fun and games. It's time for serious tips, right? So it's all very interesting to know how these things work, but how can we put them into practice? How might we apply this in working better together? So the starting point is to observe behavior. The beauty for Mozilla is that half of the people here have already taken insights. So before you even observe, you can just ask. Right? You can just ask. And there are a number of folks that I've met and worked with over the years who didn't even need an instrument to tell them. They're like, oh yeah, I know that I prefer to process internally and then talk, or I know that I prefer to talk it out, right? And shape my thoughts that way. So in the absence of being able to ask, or the person's not sure, first observe behavior. So behavior, as we said on the stereotype slides, is not always stereotypical on either extreme end. Now, there are people that you'll work with who there's no doubt in your mind they prefer introversion, right? They're going to be very, very quiet, very contained, controlled energy. And there are going to be others who there's no doubt they prefer extroversion, like big energy bounding onto the call, into the room. But for lots of folks, the behavior itself is more distributed, but leaning more in the direction of representing extroversion or introversion in processing. And again, these colors of our dots represent the correlation to the insights colors that you have. Now, why do you think it is that if you have the same preference, you might express it differently and show up in different parts of the behavioral continuum? What do you think that is? Anybody have any ideas? Send them through on chat, or if you're in SF Commons, feel free to just call it out.
Question again.
Why is it that if you prefer, if multiple people prefer extroversion, it's expressed differently on the behavioral continuum? With some people, Dwayne the Rock, so obviously extroverted, right?
Some folks feel it can be situationally specific.
Yes, adapting to the situation, right?
There is discussion of ambiversion happening.
Yeah. So this would be the ambiverted behavior. So from my perspective, I think you have a preference, but what's called ambiverts are people who are adapting behavior to be situationally specific. So if you get constant, as I think the sociologists would call social reinforcement, if you get constant social reinforcement to be big and extroverted and then you're going to continue those behaviors, right? You're going to get your goals met that way. You're going to get your needs met that way. If you get frequent social reinforcement for being quite contained in your energy, for only speaking after you think, you're going to keep behaving in that way almost all of the time. But for many of us, we don't get consistent social reinforcement for those things. And so we find we have to adapt our behaviors to the specific situation, to the people involved, and then we're more effective in that way. And so we see the behaviors on the continuum. But if you just observe, you will start to pick up behaviors that indicate a pattern, which would be a preference. So what are some of those clues that someone prefers introversion? The first clue, the one that I would look for before any others, is the pause. Someone who prefers introversion after listening to what you say, will almost always pause. The pause might be brief, the pause might be more prolonged, but there's a pause and then a response. And why is that? Thinking, editing, then talking, right? Pause isn't a problem, it's processing. Concise use of language. I have sent, 2-paragraph emails to my clients who prefer introversion and got back the 1-sentence response. 20 years ago, I worried, oh, did I do something wrong? Now I've learned, not necessarily. It's concise use of language, right? An efficiency or an economy of language, right? Conserving the coins. Speaking generally more slowly and quietly, and that is relative to others in the room, right? Relative to others in the same culture. And little movement and fewer gestures, just a more contained, controlled energy, okay? What's some clues that someone prefers extroversion? What's a pause? Because we're tending to think, edit, talk all at once, we forget to pause. We forget to pause. It's just the language keeps coming out. And in fact, what many of my clients who prefer introversion have been surprised to learn is how much pressure extroverts feel during the pause. Like, we have somehow failed you. There's silence. What have we done wrong, right? There should be words coming out. And so it's a very common misunderstanding. Lots of words, right? Verbosity, the longer emails, right? Even the texts are a little longer. Quick responses and even interruptions. And again, with apologies for the rudeness, one of the ways that you might be aware that someone who prefers extroversion is actually engaged in your idea and thinks there's something cool to work with here is that they'll start talking with you instead of waiting for you to finish your sentence. And just jumping in and engaging. And so with apologies for the rudeness, it can actually be an indication that you're on the right track with this person. More energetic gestures and movements. You see it even in your living example here, right? It's very hard for me to contain or control my arms. They have a life of their own. Now then, how might we adapt to one another? So the adaptation tips I have narrowed down to those that come up the most often that my clients who prefer introversion tell me really works for them, makes a big difference for them. And as I've administered the MBTI to over 3,000 people, this is a big sample. And since I work almost entirely in technology, it's a particularly large sample of those who prefer introversion. So first tip, if you really want to adapt and be more effective in working together, communicate first in writing whenever possible. Now, in a DevOps, more agile environment, of course, we no longer have the very formal meetings with agendas posted well in advance, but you could pop up your top 3 objectives or topics on Slack, even 10 minutes before a meeting. There are as many creative ways to do this as there are, brain cells, really. So think of a way that you might communicate first in writing whenever possible. It can be short and quick. It doesn't have to be keen or perfect. Listen very closely, but I'm going to advise you particularly to the first sentence. Why would the first sentence that the introvert says be one that you should particularly tune into? Ma'am, they've been thinking and editing for a while. Okay, the main point, the conclusion often comes out first. Right? Very important to hear that first thing that's said. 3, wait during the pauses. Don't fill the quiet space with more words. The pause is not a sign of a lack of engagement. It may be, hypothetically, but it's often a sign of thinking, reflecting, editing. Right? And ask how long people would like to think about a decision. Depending on how complex the decision is, it could be anywhere from give me a minute to process, I'll have an answer for you, to we better give this 2 days. This has huge consequences, right? And I think this is also where I see teams they get tense by mistake. The intentions are good, but if the extroverted members of the team raise an important new topic in the middle of a meeting and then come to a conclusion, right, a decision, then those who prefer introversion feel an obligation to reflect on it privately, right? To reflect on this. This is almost a moral obligation, right? To give it serious consideration. And then we'll go back one-on-one, often with each of the other team members, and say, I've been reflecting on this. I'm concerned about the decision. Here are my ideas. Then the extroverted team members who raised it in the meeting go, well, we made a decision in the meeting, right? What's up with this coming along afterwards? So you have a situation in which the introverts feel hijacked in the meeting and the extroverts feel hijacked after the meeting. So it becomes really key to actually talk about this and say, how long would people like to think about this? What's the time that we might be able to allow to give it some reflection time before we commit? And fifth, actually choose, particularly if you're the leader or facilitator of a meeting, to circle back after the conversation, whether it was an informal, impromptu meeting or a bigger one, and learn their thoughts, whether that's 10 minutes for a quick decision, up to 2 days for big decisions, but actually circle back to elicit those thoughts out. Okay. What about adapting to those who prefer extroversion? It's still about, what, 40, not quite 40% of your population? About 40, yeah. So first is communicate voice to voice when you can. Time zones being what they are, that's not always possible, but for my clients who prefer extroversion, who are, say, in Dublin, I'll make sure that I book a meeting for 7 or 8 in the morning here so that it's just late afternoon for them. And the reverse for those in Singapore. Because voice to voice it's important for them, right? It makes a difference. Do it when you can. Listen, especially to the last sentence of what the extrovert says. And why do you think that is? It's the conclusion, right? It's, I'm talking to think, I'm talking to think, I'm talking to think. This is my conclusion. Yep, yep, yep. I see some known extroverts in the room laughing and trying to not laugh too loud because, you know, we don't want to offend or take over. So the last sentence is really key. Signal that you're engaged in the conversation. And particularly, this is a request for those who prefer introversion. In the words of that great leadership role model, Dr. Evil from Austin Powers, throw me a freaking bone, people. So, you know, the silence in the processing can leave your extroverted team members feeling uncertain as to what to do. And so send that little signal, whether it's or go on, or I'm thinking, or a smile, or raise an eyebrow, just a signal, just some signal to indicate, hey, I'm engaged. This isn't me disengaging. I'm with you. I'm hearing you. I'm thinking. Let the pace of the conversation be quick. Again, I add the caveat if appropriate, right? Some conversations need to be slower, more thoughtful. Others can be quickly paced. But the fast pace is appealing to those who prefer extroversion. And when you want time to think about it, actually say that out loud. Like put the request out there. Hey, I need time to think about this. Can you give me whatever the time is that you think you need? A minute, an hour, a week, a day. I promise I'll get back to you. Right? So this helps sort of put a speed bump in the road to the decision in the meeting if the decision's key and you feel you need more time to think about it. And that speed bump's a good thing for the quality of the decision in the long run. Okay, time for one more poll. Diane?
We had a third poll.
Third poll?
It's just a question.
It's just a question poll. Yeah.
Okay.
So,
and the wording.
oh,
We have a question. Is this about the dynamic?
yeah.
So please, everyone in IRC and Air Mozilla, and if you're in the room, you can participate. Please share a dynamic you've observed that demonstrates extroversion or introversion.
Yeah.
So maybe an interaction between two people,
A team.
a team, maybe just an example that kind of illustrates some of this stuff.
It can be personal or at work.
Okay. All right. Some folks are saying, lobbying in, saying, oh, using headphones while heads down on a project. Another
Great
one,
signal.
back channeling in IRC. Wow, we're getting some people saying, I'm thinking out loud in a meeting.
Oh, awesome.
Putting a bag over my face when I tried to talk. Anyone in the room want to share? Someone feels like they're interrupting if they want to ask a question.
Yeah. And I think the message is totally understand why it feels that way, and please do ask.
Right.
Particularly if the extroverts are doing most of the talking.
Yep.
By and large, I've not found those who prefer extroversion to be offended by being interrupted. On the whole, it's generally a safe bet if you need to interrupt. Yeah. The putting the bag over my head, I love that. I had a colleague I worked with in IT who actually refused an employee award that had $500 attached to it, because this was a very old school company, and they had like, big meetings, big all hands meetings with 2,000 people there, and she was going to have to walk across the stage to accept the award. She was like, it's not worth it. It's not worth it. I'll do without the money. And so I thought it was a really good lesson for the leadership of that organization, that what looks like reward to you, they were quite the extroverts, could be punishment to some of your employees, folks. They're engineers and predominantly probably prefer introversion.
Yeah, there's lots of chatter. Feeling a compulsion to fill in the blank when there's a lull in the meeting.
Yes.
There's lots.
Yes, awesome. Awesome. I'm delighted. Delighted to hear this is resonating. That is so cool. That's so cool. So do we have time for a quick bonus, optimizing virtual meetings? So particularly folks have asked me a lot around Mozilla about virtual meetings, because 90% of your meetings are probably virtual at this point, if not more. And so we'll just run through these quickly, and we'll make everything available to you on the blog. Post as much as you can in advance. Right. This is great for both your people who prefer introversion, those who prefer extroversion. It helps the extroverts to focus on what's important to you. Right. Particularly your managers, leaders. Pause, so much harder to do, requires so much more concentration when you're virtual. But intentionally work the pause in. Intentionally raise your hand and ask for a pause. I need a pause. We need a pause. Let's take one. It's cool. It'll feel awkward at first. It's trickier on virtual, but completely doable. Ask specific team members for their perspectives. You actually get multiple benefits from this. For folks who haven't contributed for whatever reason, asking them for their perspectives further along in a meeting ensures that those get on the table where they're available. And interestingly, there's some research that indicates that for women on teams that have more men than women, you actually will get more of their thinking with a specific call out. And I'm guessing, again, that's some social reinforcement, right? 4 is actively solicit ideas that bubble up after the meeting, particularly if you're the leader or facilitator of the meeting. Just actively take a sec to solicit those on Slack or through, quick phone calls, however you want to do that. Just do it. Split your more complex decisions into 2 or more meetings as much as you possibly can. We tend to, the more agile we get, the more DevOps we get in our orientation, the more we tend to lean toward, got to make fast decisions on everything, right? And you don't actually have to make immediate decisions on everything. Often you could split a meeting into 2 parts that are just half an hour apart, and get a better quality decision. Last big, huge one. Plan for setbacks as you improve your team dynamics. I want to ask real quick, how many people have tried to lose weight? I mean, okay, and let me guess, here's how it went. You got 5 tips, you implemented all the tips, you lost all the weight you wanted, and it was gone and you were fine. Bam, done. Nah, change just doesn't work that way. And so it's really important to plan that there are going to be setbacks. There are going to be moments when your team loses weight. There's going to be moments when your team gains it back. And so you got to keep working on it. Keep it in the consciousness of the group. Talk about how effective you are as a team. Self-assess, right? And then make your plan to improve and track how you're doing it. Don't let the setbacks get you down, right? Just know they're going to be there. Get back to your core of what's going to work for you in improvement and keep going. Keep going. Okay, who's ready to make a commitment? Who's ready to make a smaller commitment than this? Here's my challenge to you. What is one thing you're going to work on to be more effective with the people with whom you work? Reflect on what you've learned about yourself and others throughout the course of the day. Choose one action by the end of today that you're going to take, something you're going to try to be more effective in adapting to one another, to others, and do it within the next 72 hours, which is just a little old adult learning methodology there. When adults try something new within 72 hours of when they learn it, it's way more likely to stick. So have that courage and just try that thing that you want to try within the next 72 hours. So if you have more questions, we have a lot of information on our blog. I'd love to have you subscribe to it. You can always find the posts on selbygroup.com. We're here for you. We're tickled to talk about this. It's one of our favorite subjects. And so please never hesitate to reach out. I'd like to wrap before we move to the panel discussion with a really key Carl Jung quote. This is the first part of it. I'm convinced that the exploration of the psyche is the science of the future. He said this in 1944 toward the end of World War II. It's the rest of the quote that I think is so important for us all to take in. This is the science we need most of all, for it is gradually becoming more and more obvious that neither famine nor earthquakes, nor microbes nor carcinoma, but man himself is the greatest peril to man. So please don't ever let anyone convince you that spending time learning about people who are different from you and learning how to adapt to one another and come to good decisions together, don't let anyone convince you that that's fluff or a waste of your time. Because the technology we create today, 10 years from now, we'll look back at it and go, oh, wasn't that cute? Remember when we did that, right? But our ability to work together to come to sustainable decisions, the future of the planet depends on it. Thank you.
Okay, so Tyler and Matt will join Jennifer up front. We also have Larissa Shapiro in Mountain View. So we're calling it a panel. It's basically Q&A with the folks at Mozilla as well as Jennifer who work on this stuff. So we have a few already, and just a reminder, tag me in IRC, tag me in Speaker Series if you want to ask a question. So one question we got was, I had no idea nearly half of the Mozillians have taken insights. How impactful is it when people display this in their workspace? So for example, in the phone book, does the benefit of that outweigh the awkwardness of feeling like we're drinking the Kool-Aid?
That's a really, really good question. And it's a perfect opportunity for me to step on a small soapbox and say, insights, MBTI, they don't solve anything. And it's really important that we don't use these tools to pigeonhole or stereotype people. They are tools to help us connect. In fact, when I've been facilitating Insights for about 4 years. And I always tell people, take it once a year. I've taken it about 4 times and it's changed each time. And it's just further proof that this is not, we don't fall on one side and that's it. We are on a spectrum, and depending on what's going on in our life. So similarly with how do we use the tools, like if you've seen the blocks around the office or the signs, it's how effective do we want it to be. I find it incredibly helpful that our team has those displayed, because I'm going to put Tyler on the spot. I know Tyler leads with green and blue-red. So he is, he's very much an introvert. I know that when he gets stressed, or if I have to go to him with something that's really frustrating, I know how to approach him. Joe on my team, I know how to approach Joanne. So those things can be very useful to teams, but should they be, I think should is not the right word. It's like, how can we leverage that to work better with people? If it helps your team, absolutely display it. But as long as everybody's on the same page and speaks the common language.
Anyone in the room have a question, please flag me. We have one more from the channel. So is there a difference between shyness and introversion?
Want me to take that one? There is a difference between shyness and introversion. And I would characterize introversion as an orientation toward where you get your energy. Shyness is more about anxiety. So it's feeling anxiety around new people, new situations, where there will be people that you don't know. And so they are actually 2 separate things. And there are shy extroverts, right, who struggle with that particular challenge, that anxiety. And there are introverts who are not particularly shy. They just have to be very careful about managing their energy, because without the anxiety of the shyness, they're going to be out interacting with people all day. Does that help?
I was just going to say that I'm an outgoing introvert, and that totally exists too. And it took me a really long time, because people would tell me I was an extrovert because I'm outgoing, and I was confused until I finally realized, well, I know that I only charge up when I go and be alone, not even with my family, alone. So clearly I'm an outgoing introvert. That was a 10-year learning
Bingo.
for me. So anyone else wants to just steal it and learn faster should feel free.
Nice. Okay. There's one more sort of question that came up in the conversation, and then I encourage folks to submit. We have time maybe for one more after that, but it was really a comment, but I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on this. Culture adds a lot of complexity to this. I think Larissa may have said that. So would love a little elaboration on that.
I can say a little about what I meant, and go ahead, any of you. One thing that I think is really true is our cultural orientation trains us very much from early in life how to interact with people. So our own introversion and extroversion has layers there. In some cultures, conversational style is more aggressive. In some cultures, the way you greet people is more aggressive. The way you deal with strangers is more or less all of this. And also I see at Mozilla, certainly, the meeting dynamics, which are complicated by introversion and extroversion, are also compounded by both culture and language. Whatever the presumed first language is in the room, like here it's English, but I've been in offices where it's French or German or Mandarin. It's really different for the person who's not the native speaker. So I think those things relate to introversion and extroversion. That's what I meant by that comment. I would love to hear what the other panelists think.
Yeah, absolutely. There is preference, and then there is how you express your preference. And the expression of preference is considerably more varied than preference. So, having had many debates and explorations with both scholars and more practical appliers of type around type and trait theory, I believe you do have a preference. You have a preference for where you direct your energy. How that is expressed is massively diverse and influenced by not only the culture in which you live, the language which you speak, but also the subculture of the company that you're working for, the subculture of the team you're on, and even the specific preferences and style of the leaders of the teams that you're on. And so those things are definitely all in the mix of how you express your preference, for sure. In fact, when my first use of type was now over 20 years ago, and it was in this building. Well, not this actual building, but this plaza, this commons. I worked for the Hills Brothers Coffee Company. That the name is still on the building. And we used the MBTI as part of our diversity and inclusion program. And our program was one of the first. It had measurable, dramatic, incredible results, and became duplicated throughout really that whole company. And so it became a very cool way for people who on the surface, primary dimensions of diversity looked like they had nothing in common, to see, oh my gosh, we process the same. We both talk to think, we both think to talk. It became really a tremendously rich part of that experience of embracing and including everyone.
I would add just the other part of that is pay attention to the meetings you're in. So you may feel that meeting where, my gosh, that just felt a little bit off. Really reflect about that. Figure out what were some of those components that might be there that are beyond introversion, extroversion, and really start to touch a little bit more on some of the cultural components. Could just be even office norms of that particular location, all of those things. But being more mindful now and having that awareness after this kind of presentation and discussion, hopefully you feel a little bit more equipped to actually go into those with a point of view now. So I would just say that, pay attention.
All right, we have a question that I think will be good to wrap with, and it sort of ties to this. It's kind of the yang to the yin of that question. But how can these tools be used to resolve conflicts, even and especially perhaps when the cause of the conflict is not personality-based?
So if anybody has been through Insights, at the very, very beginning of it, we talk about what it is and what it isn't. And there's a wonderful image that we use at the start of that presentation, which is a drawbridge. Insights, MBTI will never get us necessarily to the other side, but it helps us connect. It just helps that drawbridge get enough connected that people can start getting across it. And so these tools help us connect. They don't solve problems. They don't define us. They don't describe who's going to be a better or worse leader or a better or worse team member. They help us create common language so that we can talk to one another and come to resolutions. And sometimes a resolution is simply understanding where the other person is coming from. It doesn't even mean that there's an answer. It just means we finally understand where the other person is coming from and can approach it from there.
Conflict is definitely its own animal. It's its own topic. Couldn't agree more. This is a piece of how you can help work your way through it. I'm going to send some blog links to Diane to share with everyone. We have a number of blog posts on conflict, processes, proven tools for working through conflict together that go above and beyond just appreciating one another's preferences and styles for conflict. There are conflict implications for differing personalities, but it's just a piece of the pie. You also need good process, right? Good tools.
Great, and we are at time, so please, thanks to the panelists and Jennifer especially for a lovely morning. Go forth and vert.